Namaskar. In today's edition of Right Angle, I would like to draw all your kind attention to one of the topics or one of the themes that has been and is being or maybe will be highlighted in the ongoing no confidence motion against Prime Minister Narendra Modi in our parliament. I am not going to touch on the entire subject or for that matter the whole rationale behind this no confidence motion. I only am highlighting how during the discussions yesterday that I saw something that appeared in the press there in America in its famous daily New York Times and the way some of our parliamentarians did bring that matter in their deliberations or participation in this no confidence no motion. And what was that particular subject? I think that particular subject you all may be knowing, you must have heard them, you must have read them in today's papers also, is the revelation of questionable activities of a charismatic American billionaire. His name is Neville Roy Singham, who is of Sri Lankan and Cuban descent, and he is known as a famous socialist benefactor of far left causes. And what exactly was he doing? And that is why he has been in the news. So according to New York Times, he is the latest example of how China is successfully conducting its political warfare over, or rather all over the world, and pushing its agenda. The New York Times investigation has found how Singham has been an instrument of China's lavishly funded influence campaign that defends China and pushes its propaganda all over the world from and how has he done this? He has started or established or rather to quote exactly the New York Times, from a think tank in Massachusetts to an event space in Manhattan, from a political party in South Africa to news organizations in India and Brazil. The New York Times actually tracked hundreds of millions of dollars, how China through Singham has provided that mix so-called progressive advocacy with Chinese government talking points. And when he talks of this Indian newspaper or news organization, he has in mind or rather the help that he provided to a news portal of NewsClick. It is based here in New Delhi, and it is said to have been financed by Singham's network. And this news website's articles are sprinkled with talking points from the Chinese government's point of view. In fact, the title of one of the videos on the website was China's History, and it says that how China's history continues to inspire the working classes all over the world. Incidentally, this NewsClick, as you have might have heard through our MPs yesterday in the Parliament, been also under the investigation by Indian agencies like the ED, that is Enforcement Directorate. Um, what precisely happened was that, when early this year, the ED found out that Singham has been the main source of 38 crores of help or of donation to this news click website, and over the last 3 years, I think in between 2018 and 2021. And it is to be noted that when the ED questioned the news click and its owner, his name is Prabir Purakayastha, a known CPM leader, the whole world, particularly led by the Congress party here in India, was at the forefront in attacking the government, that how this Modi is assaulting the freedom of the press. The entire Congress party and its spokespersons those days really were in the headline news of the suppression of dissent and the imposition of fascism here in the country. The point is that the Congress party, in so doing, is not actually realizing, or rather, even if it realized, it pretended as if it did not. But the fact remains that it was precisely propagating the Chinese views and is trying to make China the biggest or the greatest friend of India. In fact, as New York Times says, Mr. Singham's groups have produced YouTube videos that together racked up millions of views. They also seek to influence real world politics by meeting with important leaders, their aides, and they also they organize the so-called camps which trains politicians. Particularly they do it in Africa. I am not very sure whether they do it in India or not. They may be doing. Maybe as things will be coming out later, we will be able to know when the investigations are carried out and they are finished by the end of that. Maybe we know also they were training some politicians here in India, and how they help the candidates how to contest elections, how to organize their protest, how to organize their protests. That the Chinese are teaching all over the world through their money and through their henchmen to the politicians elsewhere in the world, how to organize protests. Like they did once in London. London actually that resulted in great violence 2-3 years back. So my point is this is exactly what China calls its political warfare. The political warfare in the sense that you really are conducting a war against your enemies, but without fighting in the real battlefield, and you are achieving your goals without fighting. So this is something, of course, what the New York Times has done is nothing new. Many prestigious American think tanks in recent years. Why American think tanks? Even British think tanks also. They have really done great research and have found out how China has been doing it, particularly for many years. But this campaign by China has certainly gained a momentum under Xi Jinping, its present ruler and the supremo of China. In fact, this New York Times report came on 5th or 6th of August, but on August 2nd, there is a Washington-based very prestigious think tank. It is called Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. On August 2nd, it really has released a study about which I'll be deliberating on, or I'll be explaining it little bit more little later. But they really have pointed out how China is doing these sort of activities all over the world. In fact, in 2020, a former British spy, his name is Christopher Steele of M16. CA, the British intelligence agency, is known as M16, and he had compiled a 86-page report that provided details of manipulations by China to penetrate strategic and influential communities in important countries like US, India, and manipulate them to China's larger strategic objectives. He referred them as Beijing's useful idiots. Similarly, the US National Counter-Intelligence Agency and Security Center, I think in July 22 last year, they also brought out a report that revealed the extensive Chinese activities to manipulate the US state and local leaders to support policies that are favorable to Beijing in accordance with what China calls the strategy of using the local to surround the central. And as I said, that British spy said that useful idiots, and I am not going to take who the names, or I am not going to say here in India, and it would be unfair on my part to do it. But then, who you think could be these useful idiots of China here in India? Of course, let's not talk of the communist parties, both CPI and CPM, particularly the CPM. It is very well known how ideologically they are inclined. In fact, this news click, as I told you, it's owned by a leading CPM leader, and personally, really, I am aware of them because when I came to the university, they all were there in my university, and this particular gentleman was a senior to me. I'm talking of Jawaharlal Nehru University. But coming back to this idiot, quote unquote, China's idiot here, there was a gentleman in India, his name is SD Pradhan. He is a former chairman of India's Joint Intelligence Committee, and he was Deputy National Security Advisor too. He has argued, and publicly he has argued, that how China has deployed or employed these tactics and that have worked in India. He says how many political leaders and forget about, or rather let alone the CPM varieties, and when one talks of political leaders, it is essentially the Congress party, and its leaders like Rahul Gandhi and many others. So as I said, that I am not going to emphasize on the names, but these Congress leaders really have pursued the Chinese agenda in a way that China wanted to be pursued. And what is the aim? To weaken the decision-making process or decision-making capability of the present government led by Narendra Modi. They're basically, Mr. Pradhan says, basically they have tried to create doubts in the capabilities of the ruling party here or the present regime to foment anti-leadership sentiments and to diminish the will of India or Indian people to fight against China. For instance, take the case of Congress party again. Besides their normal channels of what he called the cognitive warfare, I think another name of this political warfare, the linkage between the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation and the Chinese, Communist, Party. That always has remained a big, mystery, because as you know, they did receive some, funds. How they used it or not, that, that has already been a controversial topic, and lots of, debates have already taken place. But we do not know exactly what really was the nature of the interactions between this Rajiv Gandhi Foundation and China. But one can only fathom, or one can only guess, now that these reports have come in international media too, like New York Times, and as I pointed out, these think tanks. Obviously, they have been used to pursue the Chinese agenda directly or indirectly. And how indirectly they do it? Because if you really weaken your governance or your government's decision-making process, you adversely affect it, you criticize, then obviously who really benefits the most? And it is obviously China. And in fact, Mr. Pradhan, if one sees his argument, I found out three very interesting dimensions in what Mr. Pradhan says. When the Congress leaders, particularly led by Mr. Gandhi, criticized the Modi government's response, you remember, to the Chinese incursions in Ladakh in 2021. First, it was intended to convey the message that China continues to thrust our Jawans at the border. That means that clash took place. The Chinese really overpowered our Jawans, our soldiers. Our soldiers, उनके हाथ में चुड़िया था, वो कुछ नहीं कर पाए, only पिटाई खाए. The process is that सारा दुनिया जानता है, बाद में 40 लोग उनके मरे, अगर हमारा 10-15 मरे. But then the way the Congress ecosystem and this Chinese inspired things exploited the situation, like it is only the Indian soldiers who are thrust there. And what was the basic purpose in doing this? Whether Mr. Gandhi realized or the Congress party realized or not, as I said, that direct and indirectly, what did it contribute to? It contributed to the goal of demoralizing the Indian armed forces. And what is the second point I liked very much in what Mr. Pradhan said, is that they tried to project that China has better fighting capabilities, and India is nothing. India is nothing compared to China. So China is so powerful. And what is the third point that I like the most? That they also conveyed an impression that this Indian government has why conveyed an impression that actually that convey word is wrong on my part to when I use that. Actually they alleged, they claimed, and they very emphatically said that India has surrendered 2,000 kilometers of land to China. And China has, but what is the reality? What is the fact? As you know, China has been in illegal occupation of 38,000 square kilometers of Indian territory for more than 6 decades. 60 साल से है, that has been our standard plan, that so many square kilometers of territory are under the control of China. Besides, China has also obtained 5,180 square kilometers of Indian territory since 1963 because of its agreement with Pakistan. That is in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, where that corridor, the so-called CPEC corridor, under the BRI, Belt Road Initiative that China is pursuing, that is totally under Chinese control. But this is really surprising. Over and above this, how the Congress party and these opposition leaders, really one doesn't know, claim that 2,000 square kilometers of land were added in the last 2 years, such as 2021, during this thing. The point is, from where they have got this figure? When particularly our Lieutenant General Kalita, the GOC in C, had stated, and Army Chief had said, our National Security Advisor have said, forget about the politicians. I am not talking of the Defence Minister, I am not talking of the Prime Minister, but then these Army generals, our Army chiefs, they all have said that no land under Chinese occupation is there in Ladakh in the last few years. Even 2020, there is an impasse. The Chinese troops came, they in many places they have gone back, but they are near that line of actual control. Maybe their position has changed. Suppose they were 20 kilometers behind this line of actual control. Now they have come to 2 kilometers or 1 kilometer. That is one proposition, one can argue it out. But to say that they have crossed the line of actual control and have occupied the territory is false. But this they have totally disregarded. They are not believing the Indian army. They are not believing the Indian defense, other our Air Force or any such thing, our officials. So obviously by doing this, what precisely have happened? You have really built a narrative that actually is helping China. In the process you are saying India is nothing, China is so powerful. Who has made China extremely happy by building this narrative? So the point is, and if some media outlets or our think tanks or some of our pro-China politicians have really systematically are propagating and building this narrative, who does it really help? It's China. Obviously, if China has spent some money in the process indirectly through the likes of Singham, then they have done a great job from their point of view. I mean their political warfare against India is a huge success story because of some Indians who really have literally become slaves to the China's narrative. So the point that I am talking of when I am saying this this political warfare of China, that means it includes basically three warfares, and they are called as a student of international politics, people know that it is called 3 W's, 3 warfares, which is called first W warfare is the public opinion warfare, then psychological warfare, which is little strategic in nature, and the legal warfare. The public opinion warfare is aimed at shaping and influencing your domestic and international views of China, which I explained how they have done it, how the narrative that has been built by the opposition parties here in India precisely is the example of just what I said now. And what I call it psychological warfare, it is considered strategic in nature. Basically, it is strategic because it influences various economic, political and other societal leaders to not oppose Chinese actions. I think not only rather to oppose Chinese actions, but even to support them. And the complementary to this aspect is what they call the legal warfare. Legal warfare in the sense that some foreign nationals, for instance, whether the Americans who have been bought over by under the Chinese influence, or the Indians who have been bought under the Chinese influence, they will argue, they start arguing. In fact, I read many editorials and some of our so-called leading dailies, and precisely they have been doing the same thing. If one reads them little bit carefully, they have argued that China is obeying the laws and China is always right. But it is our country. Whether, suppose if it is America, then America is wrong. If it is India, then India is wrong. If it is Britain, then Britain is wrong. So we are wrong, our policies are wrong, whereas China is talking the truth, China is talking the just thing, and its policies are always right. In fact, I have seen few of our retired diplomats, our foreign service staff, who really exactly have been doing this. If you read there, I again do not want to name them, but if you really read those their writings, and if you read some of the editorials and these op-eds appearing in some of the newspapers, one really wonders whether they are in the Indian newspapers or whether they ever worked as Indian diplomats. One really gets the impression actually one is reading the Chinese papers, and these diplomats were Chinese diplomats. So the point is, if this is the situation, how we will be then fighting this Chinese political warfare? That is the most important question that comes to one's mind. And I pointed out in the beginning of my talk that how this CSIS was a wonderful study. You can now go to the Google and download its thing. It is quite a voluminous one. It has suggested certain things, that how democratic countries like India, US, and even others who really wants to fight this Chinese political warfare or that espionage activities, how that can be done. I think it has suggested that it is not that China doesn't have any weakness also. Like they are exploiting our social media and our these things. They are indulging in these cyber attacks and things of that sort. This similar thing we can counter attack also that. It's not that the Chinese people, they all 100% are behind what Beijing is doing under Xi Jinping. There are many sources of discontent and things are not doing well there too. So my point is that China is cultivating some of the people here in our countries or institutions in our countries or in United States, and he is exploiting our social media and things of that sort. The same thing we also can do. And how we can do it? We can't do it together alone. So there is a need for the democratic countries, and that report specifically mentions India, Japan, Australia, United States. These are the four important countries, and it says that some countries can also from Europe also can be co-opted. The point is that you have to form a group of countries. You must share your strategies how to really deal with this continuing Chinese political warfare. And it is time is ticking. It says the clock is ticking. You must join hands together, and I think that makes enormous sense. Now that that Prime Minister Modi's latest or last trip to United States was a stupendous success, and we are getting closer in almost all the areas. So this is also time to join hands together to contain this ongoing Chinese political warfare in India. Of course, again, these pro-China elements and led by again the present Congress leadership will come to the again in the forefront and will devise some other terms, say things against government. But my point is that it is high time to ignore these people. We have to think of our national interest. We all must join hands with all the democratic elements elsewhere in the world. It is time to deal with China, not to surrender to Chinese propaganda and its pursuit of its interest. Thank you very much.